Hi, this is Jonathan Rosenhead, Jerusalem psychotherapist. This week's Torah and Psychology post, Parshas Vayeilech, is titled "A Rural Message Continued," because we're going to continue from last week, where we were talking about the idea of a rural message, of the role of a human king or queen, and how it serves as a conduit to be able to connect to the king and develop, or the queen, and to develop fear. And this, by extension, will develop Yiras Shamayim and will lead to Teshuvah. As we said, is a vital ingredient for Teshuvah, to have Yiras Shamayim. So I think this week the mitzvah of Hakel complements what we said last week, and we can develop this further, because Hakel is when the Bnei Yisrael came together to listen to words of Torah, to listen to the Sefer Devarim, portions of Sefer Devarim being read to them, and the pasuk says that it was the purpose of the mitzvah of Hakel was to bring them to Yiras Hashem. And according to Rashi, the person that would read the Sefer Torah was the king. So again, we see here, we have the human king of the Bnei Yisrael reading out the Torah, and the purpose is to bring them to Yiras Hashem. So let's see, how is this done? How is the mitzvah of Hakel? How does it induce Yiras Hashem? So it's very carefully thought out and choreographed, because the king and all the Bnei Yisrael would come together at the Beis Hamikdash. They would come to listen to the king. This would be done during Chag HaSukkos, and it would be after Shnat HaShmita, after the cycle of the Shemitah, which is the period that we find ourselves in now, as we're about to go into Sukkot. It's after the Shemitah year. So this is very relevant to the here and now. So let's try to understand this as we're now in the Aseret Teshuvah, and we want to do Teshuvah, and we want to develop Yiras Hashem. So the king and the Bnei Yisrael would all be together listening to the king, and the Kli Yakar says that the purpose of Hakel was to bring about Teshuvah, because there are certain times in the year when a person's individual teshuvah is accepted, and that's Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. But in general, the rest of the year, teshuvah is only a teshuvah of the whole of Bnei Yisrael together. So Rosh Hashanah, the individual can be accepted, and Yom Kippur, and the Kli Yakar says, in between Yom Kippur and Sukkot, a person isn't doing Averos, they're too busy with the mitzvahs of Sukkot, of getting ready for Sukkot. It's only when we start Chag HaSukkos that perhaps a person might slip up and start doing Averos again. And this is now the opportunity, which is for the teshuvah of the whole of Bnei Yisrael, no longer the teshuvah of the individual, but the whole of Am Yisrael, Bnei Yisrael together. And this is why it has to be done on Sukkot. The Kli Yakar says that on Sukkot is when we take the Arba Minim, the Daled Minim together, but Aguda Achas in one bundle together, and we shake it. And this is symbolic of Achdus, the Daled Minim being brought together, and in the Avodas Hashem is symbolic of the Bnei Yisrael being together and serving Hashem together. And this is why the Hakel is now done at Sukkot. If we want to do Teshuvah, it's a Teshuvah when there is Achdus, when the Bnei Yisrael can be together and can do Teshuvah together as a people that are united together. And furthermore, Reb Shimshon Hirsch explains that the fact that Hakel happens after Shemitah is that the Shemitah reminds us of the time when we were in the Midbar, when we were fully dependent on the HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There was no farming, there was no business. We were living Yiras Shamayim. We were living in a state of Yiras Hashem on a daily basis, where our sustenance and our existence was fully dependent on trust and fear of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So we see here this mitzvah of Hakel, based on the explanation of the Kli Yakar and of Shimshon Hirsch, is that it's after Shnat HaShmita, and it's also during Sukkot. It's to infuse a sense of Achdus, and to infuse this feeling and this emotion of Yiras Shamayim. And it reminds us of the Midbar, and it also reminds us of another time when there was Achdus, when the Bnei Yisrael were together and they were listening to the Torah. It reminds us of Har Sinai, of Matan Torah, when we were listening to the King, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We were listening to the Aseret Dibros, and that's when the Bnei Yisrael were together, Ki Ish Echad, Balev Echad. So we see here at Hakel, it's a very interesting mitzvah. It reminds us of our past experiences. It reminds us of the time when we were in the Midbar, living a state of Yiras Shamayim. And this prepares us now for Hakel, which is a mitzvah which is to reinforce this sense of Yiras Shamayim. And it's a time of Sukkot. It reminds us as well, it reminds us of the Achdus of Sukkot. It reminds us of when the Bnei Yisrael were together as well at Har Sinai. So it's almost like the Bnei Yisrael are role-playing. They're role-playing the time when they were in their Midbar. They're role-playing the time when they were standing at Har Sinai. And the king, the human king of Bnei Yisrael, Lahavdil, is like a Kodesh Baruch Hu. And the Bnei Yisrael standing at the Beis Hamikdash is as if they were standing together at Har Sinai and listening to the Torah. And this is in order to bring about Yiras Shamayim and Teshuvah. So as we're approaching now, we're going through the Seres Yemei Teshuvah, we can think about, we've been through Rosh Hashanah, the individual Teshuvah, and we're now going to go into Yom Kippur, which is also an opportunity for individual Teshuvah, and we're going into Sukkot, which will be an opportunity for the Teshuvah of the Rabbim, of the whole of Bnei Yisrael together. And there needs to be Achdus, there needs to be that we develop Yiras Shamayim together as Bnei Yisrael, to be Ki Ish Echad B'Lev Echad. And I think in a sense this is relating also to family therapy, because if we're focusing on this message of Achdus, that Yiras Shamayim needs to be developed as a people together, then it's looking at Bnei Yisrael as a family unit. And in order to bring about change in a family unit, there are techniques that a family therapist will use. One of them is role play. It's when the family therapist will give a specific directives or instructions to the family to act out certain scenes, to change in a way to manufacture in a forced way, to ask them to stand closer to each other, to sit close to each other, to talk to each other in a certain way, to see how they respond to these changes, to these directives. And that's what the Bnei Yisrael are being asked. They're being asked to role play the times when they were in the Midbar, to role play the time that they were standing at Matan Torah, at Har Sinai, receiving the Torah, to role play these situations and these scenes, to remind themselves of the Yiras Shamayim, to see how it will bring about change, to reinforce and to infuse this Yiras Shamayim into the family unit of the Bnei Yisrael. And this will bring about Yiras Shamayim and Teshuvah. Have a great Shabbos and keep well.